Ethan Walker liked the quiet moments best, the ones where the world felt distant enough for him to breathe. That morning, steam filled his small bathroom as water rushed over his shoulders, washing away the stiffness of another restless night. The shower had become his refuge, a place where he could think without interruption, where no one expected answers from him. Outside the tiled walls, his apartment was still, almost hollow, like it had been holding its breath along with him. He had been living with Daniel Brooks for nearly 3 years, long enough for routines to replace surprises. Daniel was dependable, kind in a steady way, but lately distant. Their conversations had narrowed to practical details, groceries, bills, weekend plans that never quite happened. Ethan often wondered when their laughter had softened into polite smiles, or when "I love you" had turned into something said out of habit rather than feeling. He did not doubt Daniel's loyalty, only his presence. As Ethan rinsed the shampoo from his hair, his thoughts drifted to the night before. Daniel had come home late, tired and distracted, offering a quick kiss before collapsing onto the couch. Ethan had wanted to talk, not about anything specific, just to feel heard. Instead, he had gone to bed alone, staring at the ceiling, telling himself that every relationship went through quiet phases. Still, the silence lingered heavier than usual. A sudden knock cut through the sound of running water. Ethan froze, his heart jumping. No one ever knocked on their door this early. He turned off the shower, listening. The knock came again, firmer this time, followed by a voice muffled through the door. "Hey, sorry to bother you. It's Mark, from next door." Ethan recognized the name immediately. Mark Reynolds, the neighbor he passed occasionally in the hallway. They had exchanged nods, brief greetings, nothing more. Mark always seemed relaxed, confident in a way Ethan both noticed and dismissed. Wrapping a towel around his waist, Ethan stepped out of the bathroom, water dripping onto the floor as he moved toward the door. When he opened it a few inches, Mark stood there holding an apologetic smile. He was taller than Ethan remembered, dressed casually, eyes attentive but respectful. "I think there's a leak coming from your side," Mark said. "Water's dripping into my kitchen. I just wanted to check if everything's okay." Embarrassment flushed through Ethan. "I was just showering," he replied, tightening his grip on the towel. "I didn't realize." Mark nodded quickly. "Yeah, I figured. Sorry, I should have waited, but I didn't want it to get worse." Without thinking too much, Ethan opened the door wider to let him see the bathroom. The space felt suddenly smaller, more intimate, as if Mark's presence shifted the air itself. Mark remained near the doorway, careful not to intrude, but close enough for Ethan to sense his warmth. "It's probably just the drain," Ethan said, trying to sound composed. "This building has issues." Mark chuckled softly. "Tell me about it. I'm always fixing something." His eyes flicked briefly toward Ethan, then away, polite yet curious. "Looks like you've got it under control." For a moment, neither of them moved. The silence was not awkward, just unexpected. Ethan became acutely aware of his own vulnerability, standing there damp and exposed, not physically but emotionally. Mark's presence stirred something unfamiliar, a feeling of being noticed without explanation or expectation. "I'll head back," Mark said finally. "Thanks for checking." "Of course," Ethan replied, surprised by a faint disappointment he couldn't explain. As Mark turned to leave, he paused. "If it happens again, just let me know. I'm right next door." Ethan watched him walk down the hall, the door closing softly behind him. He leaned against it, exhaling slowly. Nothing inappropriate had happened. No lines had been crossed. Yet his pulse told a different story. Returning to the bathroom, Ethan stared at his reflection in the fogged mirror. The man looking back at him seemed unsettled, awakened in a way he hadn't been in a long time. He knew he should dismiss the encounter as meaningless, a simple neighborly interruption. But deep down, he sensed that something subtle had shifted, like the first crack in glass, barely visible, but impossible to ignore. As the steam faded and the apartment grew quiet again, Ethan realized this moment would not leave him easily. Whatever had begun with a knock on the door had reached somewhere far deeper than the bathroom walls, and he knew, with uneasy certainty, that this was only the beginning. After the morning Mark Reynolds knocked on his door, Ethan Walker found it impossible to return to the comfort of indifference. The encounter replayed in his mind at inconvenient moments, during meetings at work, while brushing his teeth, even when Daniel Brooks sat beside him on the couch scrolling through his phone. Nothing concrete had happened, yet the memory carried a weight that refused to fade. Over the next few days, Ethan began noticing Mark more. Their schedules seemed to align unexpectedly. They crossed paths in the hallway, in the parking area, near the mailboxes. Each meeting was brief, polite, almost ordinary, but charged with a quiet awareness. Mark always greeted him with easy warmth, never lingering too long, never pushing. That restraint, Ethan realized, made the connection feel safer and more dangerous at the same time. One evening, Ethan returned home earlier than usual. Daniel was still at work, the apartment quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. As Ethan stepped into the hallway to collect the mail, Mark appeared from the stairwell, balancing a grocery bag in one hand. "Looks like we keep running into each other," Mark said with a half-smile. "Seems that way," Ethan replied, surprised at how natural the conversation felt. They stood there longer than necessary, exchanging small talk that slowly edged towards something more personal. Mark mentioned his job, the long hours, the way the apartment often felt emptier than he expected. Ethan listened closely, sensing honesty beneath the casual tone. "Living alone can be quieter than you think," Mark added, glancing away briefly. Ethan hesitated before responding. "Sometimes being with someone can feel just as quiet," he said, the truth slipping out before he could stop it. Mark looked at him then, really looked at him, with an expression that held understanding rather than curiosity. "Yeah," he said softly. "I get that." That single word lingered between them, unspoken emotions filling the space it left behind. When they eventually parted, Ethan felt both lighter and more unsettled than before. At home, Daniel barely noticed Ethan's mood. He spoke distractedly about work deadlines and upcoming plans, his voice steady but distant. Ethan nodded, responded when expected, yet felt strangely removed from the conversation. For the first time, he recognized the gap between them as something real, something that could no longer be ignored. The following weekend, Ethan ran into Mark again, this time near the building's rooftop, a space few residents used. Mark was leaning against the railing, staring out at the city as if searching for something beyond it. Ethan almost turned back, but Mark noticed him and smiled. "Didn't mean to steal the view," Mark joked. "You're not," Ethan replied, stepping closer. They talked for a long time, about simple things at first, then about choices they had made and paths they hadn't taken. Mark admitted he struggled with commitment, not because he feared love, but because he feared losing himself. Ethan understood that fear more deeply than he wanted to admit. "You ever feel like you're living a version of your life that made sense at the time, but doesn't anymore?" Mark asked. Ethan swallowed. "All the time." The honesty between them felt intimate, even without touch. Ethan knew, with growing clarity, that this connection was crossing a line. It wasn't physical, but it was intentional. He was sharing parts of himself with Mark that he no longer shared with Daniel. Later that night, lying beside Daniel, Ethan stared at the ceiling once more. Daniel slept peacefully, unaware of the quiet storm forming inches away. Ethan felt guilt press against his chest, heavy and unavoidable, yet beneath it was something else, something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. He told himself it was harmless. No promises had been made. No rules had been broken. But deep down, Ethan knew the truth. Emotional loyalty mattered as much as physical faithfulness, and he had already stepped beyond that boundary. As sleep finally claimed him, Ethan understood that what had begun as coincidence was now a choice. And choices, once made, rarely stayed hidden for long. The tension Ethan Walker had been avoiding finally demanded his attention. It surfaced in the smallest moments, the pauses before he answered Daniel Brooks, the way his thoughts drifted when Daniel spoke. What once felt like manageable distance now pressed in on him, heavy with expectation. Ethan understood that pretending nothing had changed was no longer an option. It was Mark Reynolds who forced clarity first, though not intentionally. One evening, as Ethan stepped into the hallway, Mark was locking his door. They exchanged a familiar smile, but something in Mark's expression had shifted, more guarded than before. "Can we talk for a minute?" Mark asked. Ethan hesitated, then nodded. They stood near the stairwell, close enough to feel the weight of their shared history but far enough to keep appearances intact. "I've been thinking," Mark said carefully. "About us. Or whatever this is." He exhaled slowly. "I don't want to be someone's escape." The words landed with precision. Ethan felt exposed, as though Mark had reached into his chest and named what he himself had been avoiding. "I never meant for you to be," Ethan replied, though he knew intention didn't erase impact. Mark met his eyes. "I like you, Ethan. But I won't stay in something that grows in the shadows." There was no accusation in Mark's voice, only a boundary. That honesty made the choice unavoidable. Ethan watched Mark walk away moments later, feeling both respected and deeply unsettled. For the first time, he realized that keeping both worlds intact meant losing them anyway. That night, Ethan sat across from Daniel at the kitchen table. The room was quiet, the air thick with anticipation. Daniel looked tired, but attentive, as if sensing the seriousness in Ethan's posture. "Something's been off," Daniel said gently. "I can feel it." Ethan nodded. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice remained steady. "You're right. I haven't been honest. Not about what I'm doing, but about how I feel." Daniel listened without interruption as Ethan spoke about the loneliness, the emotional gap that had grown between them. He did not mention details, did not need to. The truth was simple and painful enough on its own. "I didn't touch anyone," Ethan said. "But I crossed a line. I shared parts of myself that belonged here." Silence followed, long and necessary. Daniel absorbed the confession, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. "I wish you'd told me sooner." "So do I," Ethan replied. There were no dramatic accusations, no raised voices. Just the slow recognition that love, unattended, had drifted into something fragile. Daniel admitted his own failures, the way he had retreated into routine, assuming stability was enough. They both understood that acknowledgement did not guarantee repair. In the days that followed, Ethan moved through the apartment with a strange clarity. Whether the relationship would survive remained uncertain, but one truth had settled firmly in him. Avoidance had caused more harm than honesty ever could. He ran into Mark again a week later, briefly, in the hallway. Their exchange was polite, restrained. Yet in Mark's eyes, Ethan saw respect rather than resentment. That mattered more than he expected. "I hope you're doing okay," Mark said. "I am," Ethan replied. And for the first time, he meant it. Later that evening, Ethan stood alone in the bathroom, the mirror clear, the room quiet. The shower ran, just as it had on the morning everything shifted. But this time, he did not step inside immediately. He watched the steam rise, thoughtful rather than restless. Ethan knew that desire was not the enemy, nor was love. Silence was. Boundaries, once ignored, demanded consequences, but they also offered direction. Whatever came next, he would meet it honestly. As he turned off the water and faced his reflection, Ethan saw not confusion, but resolve. The knock that had disrupted his life had also awakened him. And though the future remained uncertain, he understood one thing with absolute clarity: truth, once chosen, had a way of setting everything else in motion. Time did not heal Daniel Miller, it clarified him. The weeks after Ethan Brooks left unfolded with deceptive calm, as if the land itself had agreed to keep his secret. Daniel returned to his routines with renewed precision, but the motions no longer reassured him. They merely carried him forward. Each sunrise arrived without judgment, and each night left him alone with the truth he had chosen to contain. Mary Miller noticed the steadiness in him first. Daniel listened more carefully now, spoke with intention, and moved through their shared life with a gentleness that felt newly earned. She sensed that something unspoken had passed through him and settled. It did not make her feel unsafe, it made her cautious. Love, she understood, could be sincere and still incomplete. Daniel did not confuse this calm for redemption. He recognized it as consequence. He had learned that fidelity was not only about actions avoided, but about truths confronted. By refusing confession, he had chosen preservation over honesty. It was a decision that spared others while costing him certainty. He carried that cost without complaint. Work in the fields continued, measured by seasons rather than memory. The barn stood unchanged, its beams bearing witness without accusation. Daniel avoided lingering there. When he did enter, it was with purpose alone. The space had returned to wood and labor, but its silence had gained weight. He accepted that some places remember for us. Occasionally, Daniel thought of Ethan, not with longing, but with respect. Ethan had left rather than become a fracture hidden within someone else's life. That choice remained with Daniel as a quiet lesson. Love that demands erasure, he now believed, was not love meant to last. Daniel's faith shifted subtly. He prayed less for forgiveness and more for understanding. He no longer asked for the past to be undone. Instead, he asked for the strength to live honestly within the life he had chosen. It was not the faith of certainty he once knew, but it was sincere. Mary and Daniel found a new rhythm. Their conversations deepened, though the deepest truth remained untouched. Daniel accepted that intimacy did not always mean disclosure. Sometimes it meant choosing presence over absolution. Mary, sensing the boundaries he guarded, respected them without surrendering her dignity. Their marriage endured, not unchanged, but intact. As months passed, Daniel recognized the story would never be told aloud. It would not end in confession or reunion. Its meaning existed in the way it reshaped his decisions, softened his judgments, and humbled his certainty. The absence of resolution became its resolution point. One evening, Daniel stood at the edge of the property, watching the light fade across the fields. The world looked as it always had, quiet, ordered, enduring. Yet he knew he was no longer the man who once believed silence equaled purity. He had learned that silence could be refuge or refuge could become hiding. Daniel turned back toward the house where Mary waited, the path clear beneath his feet. He chose it again, fully aware of what he carried with him. Some sins, he understood, are not erased by restraint or time. They remain as markers, not of failure alone, but of self-knowledge. The barn stood behind him, empty and still. The secret remained unspoken. And in that stillness, Daniel accepted the truth that would follow him forward, that a life can remain faithful in form while forever altered in its depths.